Welcome back to Hell Fortress Cathedral Midnight. In today's episode, I talk to the prolific and talented musical mercenary Molly Noyes about making music for hire, the creative process behind working on different projects and collaboration, the inspiration of her sound, her plans for the future, and much more. Enjoy! Is that wine?
No, this is Lucasade.
Oh, okay. I was like,
So-
wow, really living the goth vampire life 24/7.
No. I'm drinking Lucasade and a liter of fucking water. I exercised earlier. Just upper body shit. So I'm feeling... I don't know. Lucasade seemed like a good move.
That is a good move. It's got what plants crave, I guess.
No, it's actually funny because, like, did you get the whole drink Lucasade when you're not feeling well thing from your parents?
No, we did warm 7-Up.
Yeah. No, just sometimes it'd be Lucasade, and I'm like, I was like knocked out with the vaccine for about 2 days, like really tired, sore, etc. And I was like, what? I had a bottle of fucking Lucasade sitting in there. That shit would have had me back up in an hour. Anyway.
You have pretty much over the last couple of years just like rocketed from small indie musician to jobbing mercenary in the musical trade.
Mm-hmm.
Congratulations! It's
Thank you.
Pretty fantastic. You've been doing music for like YouTubers and stuff like that. What are you working on at the moment?
I think I can disclose this. Yeah, they've actually come out and said it. So I'm working on a soundtrack for the YouTuber Curio for their Cyberpunk video.
Wow.
So that's what I'm working on. I'm working on a soundtrack for another person who I don't believe has disclosed what they're working on yet, but what I can say is it's an RPG based on a well-known children's TV show that has a great... I'm going to be coming very close to the line here, but it's quite popular, well-received show that has a really nice soundtrack that I quite enjoyed. So it was fun to do stuff that was very much in my wheelhouse on that. I'm just after finishing up, also for Curio, soundtrack for a Matrix vid, which was a lot of work in a very short period of time, but I'm quite happy with it.
Yeah, you're kind of working on all three of those at the same time, huh?
No, one after the other. It just that's just the way it worked out. I'm also working at the moment on and off on a video game soundtrack for a game called Zoosim by Ali Cars, and that I'm not sure what the projected date for the release of that is, but it's not like a fixed deadline thing, but it's great to work with her.
When you say you're working on a soundtrack for an RPG, is that like a video game or is it a tabletop RPG?
Tabletop RPG, pen and paper.
Oh, cool. Yes, that's always fun to try and write music for. Like my Investigators album was all, intended to be like tabletop background music.
Yeah, I think this is just for the kind of demonstration podcast video series. But as far as I know, the agreement we've reached is that the source book will be sold with the soundtrack. We're splitting the proceeds of that. So I think some amount of the materials, I think the core will be available for free, but if you want like certain little add-ons plus soundtrack, you pay for it, which I think is a pretty reasonable way of doing things.
Yeah, like one of the hardest things to do, I've certainly found, and I think a lot of people do, in trying to get gigs, like making music for people and stuff like that, is, how much money do you ask for? How do you go about doing a contract, stuff like that? Because, like, I know that, like, pretty much almost everybody who approaches me to make stuff asks me basically to do it for free, or tries to talk me down for my initial price, and I just send them packing. How do you navigate that? Like starting like, did you have trouble with that starting off?
No, so I was originally doing soundtrack work for a very good girlfriend, Sarah Zedek, and her YouTube shit. So I'm not going to disclose money, but there was money involved. There is money involved, but it's complicated. Because, a relationship emerged out of that really, really quickly. But, sleeping my way to the top, she introduced me to a few people, and a few people saw... Actually, one thing that was really good... Actually, we can kind of go back and forth on this, but one of the things I've always asked for is credit. I require credit on the video, and I require credit in the links. Now, most people are not going to click those links, sadly. Not a lot of people are going to spot those, but some creators will watch the video and go, that music wasn't bad. Who did that? Oh, there's the name. I'm going to look them up. Oh, there's the link. Hi, Molly. I would like you to do music for my video. So I got a few contacts out of that. Not just necessarily a circle of friends thing. Not all the YouTubers sit in one big room smoking cigars, planning on how to use cultural and Marxism to deconstruct Western civilization or anything.
That's not what Ben Shapiro told me.
Oh, little Benny boy. He's so worried about everything. I always request that like inclusion of that details. And I mean, a few people do click through that stuff and I get a couple album and soundtrack sales off that, but mostly it's other creators. So that's pretty handy. And then the discussion around the contract is basically, look, you can use this music in your vid, you can use this in later vids. If you're going to go get some rebroadcast arrangement with a network television or somewhere off YouTube or somewhere in a different channel, we need to talk about that further. But if it's staying on your channel, then yeah, you use this wherever you like. I retain the rights to sell it on Bandcamp or relicense it to someone else for use. And most people are fine with that.
I find it personally, I have found it in the early days, I found it really hard to try and assert myself with that kind of thing. And these days, I'm almost like, I can't be arsed. Like if maybe it's just because the only offers that I'm getting are from absolute chancers. I'm just like, once they kind of are like, you think you could go a bit less, I just tell them to fuck off.
I've had to be diplomatic with people. There's no point in burning bridges. I've had a few people approach me and it was pretty clear they either didn't know what they wanted or they wanted something for pretty nothing worth my time. I'm not going to do someone 30 minutes worth of music, which is going to take me a week or so for a basic soundtrack for $200. It's not happening. There are exceptions. I mean, like if someone's looking for a single track for a podcast, I won't say the name, but they just said, hey, do you want to do some music? We'll pay you. And I was like, I listened to your podcast. Have this track. It's fine. It's like 20 minutes work. I'm very, it's fine. I'm happy with it. If you are starting to make money at some point and want some more music, come back to me, pay me. That's fine. Mostly people do not get freebies. Do not ask me for freebies. It's not fucking happening. One component though of like, especially having an income which is paying my rent off music is, now I haven't had this problem before, but I can be very selective. If someone approaches me and said, hey, I want you to do music for me, if I don't like them, I don't have to deal with them. There's a degree of artistic freedom in that. Now, I don't mean like if something in their mannerism annoys me. I mean, if I genuinely dislike the content they're producing, I don't have to worry about engaging with them. We'll see how long that attitude keeps me fed, but so far it's working. In terms of like money negotiations, I do have a rate I would charge, I don't know, Coca-Cola or, Hyundai or something. Bit lower for creators. Sometimes I've agreed what would be considered maybe not an incredible rate on the basis that, I can see they're up and coming. I can see they're doing well. I expect that once their income improves, that my rate of pay would improve. And the idea here is to build a relationship with someone that you want them to continue paying you relatively regularly for music, and that, it's an ongoing gig. I'd rather receive a slightly smaller amount of money initially and have it go up over time and deal with that rather than someone breaking the bank to pay me once off and then going, she's too expensive, I can't afford her.
Yeah.
It's complicated.
Something I found with this whole thing is that I've been approached by some people in the last little while, like someone who's making like an indie first-person shooter and stuff like that, where they're like, "Oh, I'm making this passion project. I'd love to have you do music, but I'll contact you someday when I can afford it." And it's like, that's great. And I look at the project and it looks awesome, and I wish I was like 16 again so I could just fucking stay up all night and actually do these things for free, because like they're like half of these things, like I really want to work on them, but I just physically cannot make myself do it if I'm not getting paid, because I'm fucking tired and I have a bazillion responsibilities and stuff.
I won't say which project, but as I mentioned with the RPG, I'm getting paid for that. We're doing a profit splitting thing on the soundtrack being sold with the source book, but on one of the projects I'm working on, which I'm not going to discuss which one specifically because I don't want to be disclosing certain things, I've agreed to a very small amount of money up front and then a split of the profits. Actually, a pretty generous split of the profits. Like if it does well, I'm potentially going to do incredibly well out of it. But if it doesn't, I've done a lot of work and not made a ton of money out of it. The advantage here is it's not a very hard deadline, so I get to work on it in between other projects. And also, it actually gives me a lot of time to polish the individual tracks. It's not an absolute ton of work. Thankfully, a lot of the tracks can be reused in different sections. But it's not necessarily an arrangement I'd ever recommend to someone if they're not getting regular paying work, especially because this is going to be something that's going to take a while to come out. It means I'm not making a lot of money for it and doing a lot of work. It mightn't actually result in money in the future. And obviously, if it doesn't do well, it's not a lot of exposure either. And, don't work for exposure because people die of exposure, as they say.
Yeah. Something interesting that we were talking about before is kind of the different approaches that you take to your different projects, which is something I'm always interested in like the thought process there. Like you're saying, like for the Matrix project, you were going for like a 90s kind of sound and other stuff. Can you talk a little bit about that? I'm especially interested in like how if you have any specific theory or process behind making game music, because that's such a very specific thing with specific goals.
So I'm not so actually we'll do game music first, so that's okay. I'm not dealing with dynamic sound systems where like the music shifts over time. I'm dealing with more classic game soundtracks, so it loops. It hasn't, especially if there's going to be dialogue involved or like, certain special effects or whatever, you don't want it to be too prominent, but it has to repeat in a way that doesn't drive people absolutely insane. There has to be a lot of variation in it in terms of it can't just be monotonous. There has to be certain key changes or whatever, but tempo changes tend not to be a huge thing in video game music. But setting the right tone and vibe is a big deal. So I don't know. It's mostly about it looping pleasantly. Like, could I listen to this for 20 minutes without, losing my mind or it beginning to drill a hole in my head? Is it too distracting? So obviously the dynamic range of it's going to be relatively low, unless it's a specific section whereby you want to actually startle people or make them unsettled or whatever. It has to have a decent pace to it, but you can't use a lot of rhythm instruments if they're too aggressive, all this kind of stuff. And it really just depends on the game. With Zoosim, it's not chiptune, but it's inspired very much by chiptune by someone has compared the soundtrack to Earthbound, a game I've never played, but I'm not going to resent or disagree with that assessment. But I was definitely thinking about stuff like Undertale. The music was not necessarily inspired by it, but some of the abstract ideas of like, okay, how do I go about writing this? And mostly it's about receiving feedback from the creator. Ultimately, it's their project that you're contributing to, not something you're necessarily co-working on. So I've never really had to throw out tracks, but I have to rework them for individuals. And to be honest, someone coming back and saying, yeah, I don't like this is very reassuring to me because, I want to not think that they're just kind of quietly going along with what I'm doing and saying I'm never working with her again because I was too intimidated to give feedback or something, which I doubt, but I worry.
Yeah, that's for sure. I've had a couple of projects where it became very clear that the person didn't care about what it was. I remember I was working on I was quote unquote hired to do music for a movie, and after a while I couldn't do it. They weren't paying. I realized they weren't paying me, and I was like, look, I can't do this. And they're like, okay, well, can we just use some of your music that already exists? And could you pick out the tracks that would suit the movie? And it's like, you don't give a shit, do you? Like, you don't care about my music. You don't care about your project. You don't care about any of this. Yeah, that's always a horrible thing.
Yeah, I tend to be... so the opposite of subtext to me isn't explicitness, it's super text. Being like really upfront with people. So saying, look, I want you to tell me if you don't like a track. I want you to tell me if you want stuff changed. I want you to tell me the pace is wrong, the vibe is off, if I'm going the wrong direction with stuff. I send people kind of rough versions of the tracks. I don't tend to release fully finished versions till they're done. With people I've started working with, this is kind of insurance against them using finished tracks without paying me, but whatever. But it's just the thing of like show people work in progress stuff, so I'm not committed to fully finishing something. If they're going to come back and ask for corrections or changes or say, well, actually, no, scratch that. Honestly, I've worked on tracks before it had to be scratched. They go into the archive. I'll pull them out later, maybe rework them for someone else. People are very happy with that. I was asked to contribute music to a video game a few years ago. The person lost interest in pursuing it. Some of their tracks ended up heavily reworked, with some of the ideas being put into the Zeusum tracks, but mostly they just kind of sit in an archive somewhere. With, I think being really upfront with people is a good way to establish a degree of trust and mutual understanding, so that, I don't know, you get a measure of someone. You can kind of figure out if you want to work with them or not. I've never fobbed someone off, but I have engaged with someone who it was clear they hadn't really thought about, did they actually need this music? Did they want it? Was it going to suit them? And I kind of said, look, maybe in a while you actually will want this, but come back to me when you know what your budget is, when you think it's going to benefit you. I'm trying to be really diplomatic here, no burning of bridges and such. But it was very much a case where when they initially reached out, I don't think it was malicious. I don't think it was trying to get like free work. I just think they hadn't really thought about why they were talking to me, like, oh yeah, music, that sounds great. I want to add that to my videos. I'm like, okay, do you think you can justify the expense? And when I was asking what the budget is, they were like, oh, I don't really have a budget. And I'm like, well, okay, have a nice day. But I didn't say that to them up front.
Well, I mean, you could tell. It's pretty easy to tell when somebody is earnestly misguided and when someone is a fucking chancer. Like, especially like usually it'll be really obvious with like the project name, or you look at it and you look at the graphics or the quality and the content, and you're like, nah, this person has no fucking clue what they're doing.
I think as well, if someone's just starting out or it's someone's first project, there is a kind of responsibility to say, hey, yeah, I don't really have the time to contribute to this right now, or I don't think this is the best thing ever. As conceited as this might sound, I don't necessarily want to attach my own name to a particularly badly worked out vanity project that doesn't look the best, or is maybe ill-considered, or is maybe a bad mesh of ideas. Obviously, I'm not responsible for the game or video or whatever it is, but I will be associated with it. And so it doesn't reflect well on me either. Again, I have to be diplomatic with people and also not very mean. Like some very, I want to say young here, but not necessarily young in ages. Maybe someone coming to their particular craft who hasn't matured in their tastes or an approach. The whole idea, you have to work at something for a given amount of time to really be good at it. I know people say 10,000 hours, that's nonsense, but I just think you have to kind of go through a lot of your ideas to finally hit on stuff that actually begins to be good. I think some people don't really understand that their first stab at something probably isn't going to be great. And while they might find their idea very darling to them, or novel or unique, it mightn't seem that great to someone who's been already working in that specific genre of music or writing or what have you, who's kind of seen this kind of thing before. And again, being attached to that wouldn't look great for me. So I said really smug here, but
no, you don't.
I'm just trying to be very
honest.
that's
something I think both of us has probably struggled with that when we were starting off as well. Is because we grew up in the internet culture where you can basically finish a rough, shitty draft and post it. And like I remember when I first started making stuff, I was posting absolute crap just to try and get feedback. And there's loads of indie darlings and the Toby Foxes of the world where it's like, you made Undertale in 2 years, or artists will seem to burst out of nowhere and come out with masterpieces.
I would say there's usually a backlog of work that we never got to see. So actually I'll double check the dates, but even the volumes of work I actually did. But I mean, I've been a musician since I was 13. How much do I want to give away here? I have a motor neuron thing. It's not debilitating. It's not a massive issue, but I don't have the best fine motor skills. So I really, really, really tried to be a bassist. And I was at it for years, and I wasn't great. I wasn't bad. Like, I could hit the right notes and stuff, but the fidelity of control wasn't there. So most of my music is made with a mouse or a MIDI keyboard and then neatened up by the mouse. So after years and years of doing that, yeah, I had a good ear for music. I could think of what I wanted to do. I had a rough idea of like music theory. But in terms of actually performing it, moving to electronic was really good. Now, checking out my... Let me see if I can find my music archive here. This will just take 1 second. I hope people enjoy the ASMR clicking. So I started making electronic music in 2008. And I didn't release anything till 2018. Now, it wasn't... My approach wasn't great, and I wasn't churning stuff out in terms of like rough drafts or works, but I was mostly keeping it to myself and looking for feedback. And I do think the worst cruelty you can do to someone to say, oh yeah, that's brilliant, when it's not. I think I was in the car with you. I'd given over one of the amps, and I was like, oh, what do you think of this? And you were like, yeah, the stereo width isn't great, and your balance is weird. And you were giving me all this feedback, and initially, like, part of me was going, I am dying now. This bitch is killing me. But I was also like, this isn't coming from, like... you know, a hatred or dislike or like vehemence or anything. This is just you being like, yeah, this is what you need to work on. So I did, you know, watched a bunch of tutorials, took an online course from Berkeley. Did you know, people, you can just get these courses for free? And yeah, I think I've gotten better. I definitely think my production has improved over the last couple of years. But yeah, I don't think anything I really made 2008 to 2018 as an individual, electronic music-wise, was good. I don't think it was good. And I think 2018 to 2021, there's been a lot of changes. I've improved in a lot of areas, but a lot of it has been producing and releasing. And as much as I say, like, look, you need a kind of backlog of work, you know, to get rid of your, like, what you think are amazingly good ideas, but on reflection aren't that amazing. You do eventually have to start releasing something. I probably could have started putting stuff out in 2017, but I was just apprehensive because when you're getting better at something, you look back a few months and you go, that's not that good. And you want to rework it. And then you want to rework it more. And then it's been 2 years and you still haven't put an album out. And at that point, I was like, no, I saw this. I'm putting something out there. Even if I don't think it's the best thing ever, I think the quality is good enough.
Yeah, that first release was Black Noise Machine your first release?
Yeah,
it's very good. Like everything in it holds together. It works. It's interesting. Like it as far as first releases go. It's a strong one.
Oh yeah, but a lot of my technique wasn't down. I think the mixing is... Look, here's the thing. Most people who aren't musicians are not going to sit down and go, yeah, the panning isn't great on this particular instrument. But they'll hear something and they'll go, that doesn't sound right, but they won't know what it is. But, you know, I mean, you've got like low fidelity music that exists. Black metal as a scene for years was just low fidelity. A lot of punk is relatively low fidelity and stuff. I think people can kind of forgive if something isn't perfect, if the vibe sits with them or if it's novel enough or it's interesting. But I wanted to get better. So I just, you know, I keep practicing. I keep watching tutorials. I think a big thing for me is listening to a lot of different types of music, watching production that is not necessarily in a predefined style that I would associate my work with has been beneficial. I think I've mentioned this before, other podcasts, other chats with people, the notion of reference pools. There's a kind of stagnant approach where you only look within your own genre. And this can be anything, music, television, what have you. You only look within your own genre for inspiration and you just replicate what already exists in there. You're kind of replicating from a very small gene pool. You kind of have to look beyond that. You get these like island cultures or whatever way you want to describe them where they've just kind of split off from a mainstream. Let's talk about music here. Let's talk about black metal for maybe a couple of years, actually maybe a decade. Recently, this has begun changing, in my opinion. Black metal heads can come contradict me all they like, but I'm using this as a relative example. It kind of stagnated. It broke off from mainstream culture. It wasn't pulling in inspiration from other things. It narrowed in terms of what was considered part of the genre or not. Whenever people say, oh, that's not really X genre, when someone has come along and do something slightly different, you know you're actually in trouble. There's some stupid line I remember from a 90s comic, which is mutate and survive. I think that's true. I think stuff needs to change. If it undergoes enough change, it becomes a new genre, fine. But you can continue to innovate within a given genre. Hip-hop has mutated and survived a very long time. Mainstream metal has done that a very long time. Specific subgenres may not be around tomorrow, but if they keep changing stuff up, they will be. They just might be super recognizable to someone who's into it 20 years ago. But if you're not advancing from 20 years ago, what are you doing? The world does not stop changing. Actually, change is the only constant, as it were. And maybe to circle back around, you were asking about the Matrix vid as well? Sorry, I go on these tangents.
That's good for podcasting.
So what were you asking about the Matrix soundtrack or what
Just
have you?
sort of like how the project how the brief of the project affects how you approach making the music itself.
So you can you can kind of play into genre stereotypes. You can work against them. I think if you were making a video that related to some fantasy stuff, like actually this is something I've done, like The Witcher, you can just pick up a bunch of medieval-esque instruments and some like operatic stuff and go and work on that. But if you throw in like some jazz piano or some funk or something, it's maybe a bit more challenging, but it might surprise people, might keep them awake. With The Matrix, though, I was like, okay, I'm going to sit my brain in kind of a 90s electronic area, but not just stuff that would have been made for The Matrix. Because if you go back to the soundtrack, not the incidental music, but the songs that were selected for it, you know, music inspired by or associated with The Matrix, not all of it's that strong these days. So I was more or less pooling stuff that would have been popular at the time, certain new metal, certain electronic music, and so on and so forth. And I was kind of thinking like what these sounds and textures sound like. In the same way though that synthwave does not pull from the actual 80s as much as it pulls from an imagined idea of the 80s, like, you know, much better production, bigger instruments and so on and so forth.
I have my own theories on this. I could rant about this for fucking ever.
Well, what I was going to say was, in a similar way, I didn't want to just grab a bunch of stuff from the 90s. I was thinking, okay, what sounds 90s-esque to me? And look, with a lot of background music, you're not going to have the range you would have with a song or a track that has to stand front and center. So in a lot of cases, this is very simplified stuff. With certain soundtracks, there's more range. Video games are a good example. If you've no voiceover or anything, you've a lot of range to do very elaborate music. If you're dealing with someone talking over it, though, not only do you have to restrict things like you have to EQ the hell out of it, scooping out a certain chunk for the person's speaking range, but you also can't do things like have too much percussion. It can't have too much motion in it. It can't change up at certain points. Weird key changes are probably not acceptable. It depends. You kind of have to work with. I often will have the rough audio of the vid up, and I'll be playing back. I'll be listening to it and going, okay, what's going to fit in here? What suits the mood of this section or chapter, whatever you want to call it, and then I'll work from there. So initially, you know, I'll usually start with some very strong piece of music. If there's intertitles, that'll have something very striking. But underneath someone speaking, it's often very stripped back. But it's about picking sounds from the era or that I think work with the topic of the video. With a video game, it's more about like trying to really strongly match the mood of the area or the event that's ongoing within the game's narrative.
Cool. I didn't know that video essay soundtracks were done to the actual rough audio, and that you had to compensate for the voice and the EQ. That's very interesting.
Yeah. So I don't know if everyone else does this. You'll often find. How to put this? I don't know. I don't speak to a lot of other people who compose for this stuff. I've kind of just intuited how I'd go about it. But after bumping into coincidentally one other person who does this stuff, they basically follow the same thing. They'll get a rough audio from the person, the podcaster, the speaker. What is the word
YouTuber?
I am looking for here? The YouTuber. Thank God.
No,
thank you. Darling, please. But yeah, they'll get an audio from the YouTuber. They'll figure out the kind of vibe for the chapters. They'll do a rough track that maybe can loop well or has like a verse chorus-ish structure that they can just kind of break up later. Then they'll get the final audio. Then they'll stretch the tracks to the sections, and then they'll send them on, and the YouTuber will import them into their project and kind of work with them. One or two people I've worked with are actually, they have a background in audio, so they can do their stuff themselves. But often I'll have a section of audio where it's just, most sections are just them speaking, but I'll have them speaking quite clearly. And I'll kind of figure out where an EQ would sit, and then I'll invert that and put it on the music. Now, this does mean sometimes going back and reworking the music because, you know, these lovely high and mid notes have now been completely bloody crushed. But it's better than forcing them to sit there and play with the volume, which either brings it right to the back, to which point, you know, those like really subtle hi-hats you put in there or those pads are going to vanish in the mix, or they're going to have it too loud and it's going to start interfering with their speaking, which is going to be a huge problem. Some people are hard of hearing. Some people do not actually particularly like hearing a clash between speaking and music. I know when I was starting off, I didn't really compensate for this properly, and some of the videos, it wasn't bad, but there was a bit of a clash between the speaker's voice and the music. Mostly it was fine though. Mostly people kind of worked out what to do with it. But you know, you just kind of evolve the process over time. But yeah, as I said, speaking to someone else, they have basically the identical process. It does seem like, for very good material reasons, there are certain things you do a certain way.
Yeah, for sure. That's interesting. I'm always. I'm sure there's a lot of people who are interested in getting into that will be interested.
Oh, they really shouldn't. I don't need any competition.
It's not That's very capitalist of you, Molly.
No, I know. No. I really hope people do. There's far more people doing video essays and similar stuff out there that could definitely do with it. If anything, some people could maybe do it for themselves. I don't know, but I think one of the more interesting conversations I've had, so this is a tangent, stop me if you're not interested, but one of the more interesting conversations I've had with a number of YouTubers is this idea that, like, yeah, I'm using stock music, but I spent ages looking through, you know, these available like free sound libraries or whatever to find something that kind of suits, and then I try to put it in there and it doesn't really work, or it's a bit too fast or something like that. Like, I will literally sit down and try figure out a good BPM for certain sections, just because I want it, like, okay, this section has to be more exciting, or doesn't always mean higher BPM, but often does. Or, okay, this is a very sedate section, or whatever the case is, and then work from there. If you're just trying to pull from a huge sound library and you're not very musically inclined, you might think, oh, this piece of music sounds good, but does it sound good for what you want it to do? And not to mention, like, again, I'm not knocking these things. They're obviously a great resource for some people, but I don't know if they're universally good for everyone. And I don't know. Look, this is bespoke versus off the rail, off the rack, whatever the bloody
from the
expression
archives.
from the vault.
Something I'm interested in is kind of how you got into industrial music and wanted, you know, it became something that you wanted to make. Because I certainly, well, I was initially introduced to 9 Inch Nails by my ma, and I wasn't huge into them until a friend of mine, Mike Wazian, who does a bunch of my album art, introduced, like was just talking about how much of an effect they had on him, and he showed me Skinny Puppy and stuff, and I liked it in a kind of an aesthetic way. But what really made me fall in love with it was just the amount of time I spent depressed in Dublin City. You know, walking, not having a car, having to walk very long distances very late, where all the shop fronts like closed, and walking around with no money in my pocket, surrounded by advertisements and stuff.
God, yeah.
And I feel like there is obviously industrial music. It comes from that kind of anxiety. And I feel like, you know, there aren't that many like rural industrial music artists. I'm just wondering, like, where did that come from? Did it resonate with you for similar reasons?
Yeah, I suppose just to work backwards, I don't know if I'm even comfortable with the tagline industrial anymore. I think it certainly describes a lot of my inspirations, although obviously there's like EBM and stuff in there. But I think industrial in the space of how it was originally conceived, obviously, is around, like, you know, various industrial towns and cities, the UK and other places. Obviously draws on music, concrete and all that. My music tends to sit in a kind of weird electronic space. The vocals are kind of somewhere between pop and screaming now on the next album. I use a lot of field recordings. This is everything from canals to a really nice elevator. When I was in Rome a few years ago, it clanked amazingly. And also it had this really amazing, it was painted red on the interior and it was brass. And it had these like really awful creaking and groaning sounds. I called it the Argento elevator, which I think you'll personally appreciate. That's what the files are called. Yeah, I'm not sure exactly what genre I'm in, and I actually kind of like that. I've just called it, I think I'm just going to tag it like, you know, industrial pop, electronic, whatever, and hope the great algorithm sorts me out. But what originally got me into industrial music is kind of interesting. I don't know the exact causal link, and I don't think things are necessarily, you know, unicausal, having a singular cause, but I know that, like, I was very into metal and punk and stuff. So at one stage it would have been like, you know, punk, which, you know, has a crossover with like various things. Like, you know, actually, video games might have helped. Like hearing The Prodigy on Wipeout 2097's soundtrack, or discovering Information Society do Ozar Midashrim for the original Soul Reaver, or haphazardly walking into HMV and discovering this incredibly cool album artwork for Leibach Opus Dei. I probably overpronounced that. Leibach's Opus Dei, and just going, yeah, this is like €4, whatever. Because like for whatever reason, industrial was next to the metal section, and industrial sounds cool. And then just like, this. There's a website called Gnod, and you put in like various bands you like. This was years ago. It's still up. And you put in various bands you like, and it recommends stuff. And I'd never heard of these bands, and I was like, I'm just going to go find them. This was pre-YouTube. I may have pirated some of them. I have subsequently paid for their music. Thankfully, other than being a Bandcamp, I was able to buy CDs from them. But yeah, it led me to a lot of bands. And I think it was often looking for people and going, oh, who are these people inspired by? I'll listen to some of that. Who have they collaborated with? I'll listen to that. Like, obviously, discovering like Pigface, which obviously is an industrial supergroup. I mean, mostly guys, but whatever. I think Ayatara, I want to say. God, I'm terrible with names. But I think like she was one of the few women involved with it. Can you hear that? There's an ice cream van outside. We'll give it a moment, shall we?
Oh, it's fine.
Or does it work?
Yeah,
does it add to the ambiance? Right. But yeah, like discovering bands like Pigface and discovering who'd collabed with them really helped. But I mean, clicking the related acts on Wikipedia, it certainly didn't hurt. Just being interested in who had inspired who and who was related to who. But yeah, I don't know. I can't really point to any singular strain of stuff. There was definitely like friends who like pointed me at stuff. I was really into goth when I was a teenager, and then there's a lot of like, I don't know what we call it, second wave goth that were really electronic, but didn't really do it for me. But they would cite maybe some older bands, and then, you know, some younger bands would show up and say, oh, we actually are inspired by those older bands.
Let's zoom in on this for a second.
Yeah, sure.
Goth music, the early goth music and the post-punk stuff. I don't get it. Why is it good? Like what do you get from it? Personally, I listen to like a couple of minutes of it every time I try and listen to like a post-punk or a goth song. Album. I listen to one song. I'm like, this is cool, and then the second song comes on, and it's the same thing, and I'm like, oh, it just keeps going like this, doesn't it? And I know there's a visceral connection, as with all music that I don't get. There's a visceral connection that's not there. What is it about it that connects with you that I'm not getting?
Well, what I would say is, in order for a genre to be identifiable as a genre, there has to be a sufficient volume of work that sits within a similar sonic space or aesthetic or whatever you want to call it. And one of the consequences of this is a lot of it's not great. A lot of it's hangers-on, or people who followed, you know, various other acts, or people who impersonated other people, or who shifted their sound to match them, or people who had one good album. So yeah, a lot of it isn't going to be great, and I think I can probably count on one hand the amount of goth bands I still think are really good. But I think, like, say, Susie and the Banshees, the Sisters, like, yeah, you know, very, very big and obvious and identifiable names. I like most of the stuff they did. Susie, I think at one stage rejected the goth tag. I don't care. It's just what they're categorized as. If they don't like it, fine, post-punk, whatever they want to call themselves. I like it. They continually evolved and changed and something. There's something about the weird, like Susie and the Banshees' early work, really nice bass tones, really nice reverby haunting guitars, her incredibly hypnotic voice really works for me. The Sisters' early stuff, just, I don't know, it's a good vibe.
But yeah, they're actually those two bands I actually do vibe with. I don't listen to them nearly enough. I keep forgetting they exist until people bring them up. But they're actually very interesting, especially Susie. Like their stuff is way more experimental and has a bit more adrenaline, a bit more color than a lot of drab sort of like Bela Lugosi's Dead type stuff does.
Oh, I actually like Bauhaus, but I can't remember the name. Maybe is it The Sky's Gone Out or something? Whichever album it was where they were willing to be more experimental. It was written more by the rest of the band than the lead singer. Cannot recall his name. I much preferred it. It seemed weirder. It was just kind of manic or something. Some of the stuff just doesn't vibe with me. I think in a lot of cases I just need to listen to it till it kind of clicked in my head, but I'm not sure if the investment was worth it. Their last follow-up final album, Go Away Wide or something, didn't like it. I owned it. It's gone now. I actually got rid of all my CDs a few years ago. Everything's digital, but I don't think there's nothing necessitating that you like everything done by a band or every track done by a band, but there's certain bands where I can't really think of a single track off the album I would skip. Honestly though, the Cult, previously Death Cult, I think, previously Southern Death Cult, unless I'm very much mistaken. Early stuff's great. They're kind of stadium rock era. Don't care for it. Don't listen to it. Would never go back to it. The Sisters moving more to a heavier rock sound. Didn't care. Like the early stuff. Didn't like the later stuff. I don't think I ever really got into the Creatures, which was Budgie's and Susie's side project, post kind of coming in near the end of Susie and the Banshees and then following on afterwards. Don't think it ever did anything for me, but I know a lot of people like them. I don't know. I think a lot of the second wave goth stuff was, as I said before, it was kind of stagnant. It was drawing on a very narrow reference pool. Everyone was very serious about this. But if you go back and look at like some of the videos for Susie and the Banshees, they're having fun. They're enjoying themselves. If you go look at any of the Sisters of Mercy stuff, there's a tongue-in-cheek element to it. There's a lack of boring seriousness, which I don't find very appealing in artists. I don't see why you'd be doing something unless you're enjoying it. And
I tried checking out Fields of the Nephilim because everyone always. I tried checking out Fields of the Nephilim recently, and people are always citing them. And oh my God, talk about self-serious. It's like, why is your voice like that? Why are you doing that Tom Waits impersonation? Stop it.
Yeah, I mean, like I do know. I think it's Andrew Eldridge's Sister Mercy. Like, he has a relatively deep voice, but a lot of people just ended up impersonating him. It was just a thing. Again, it was like, oh, well, this is, people heard, Eldridge and were like, oh, that's the goth voice. I have to do that. I'm like, no, you don't. But I mean, you see this with like 90s hair, 90s, 80s, 70s, good God, whatever, the kind of hair metal, whatever the hell that sound of, singing is.
Or every thrash band trying to do a Californian accent. Yelled in that very specific way.
It's almost like by overly adhering to the genre conventions, you utterly fail to be differentiated from hundreds of other bands, more or less absolutely mimicking some exemplar style, and you don't really stand the test of time. Now look, music is ephemeral. I don't expect people to be faithfully holding on to certain CDs, forever. I don't think it is necessary that a musician's work, is eternally relevant. But I think if you exist for a week and then disappear, maybe your contribution wasn't that interesting. But look, hey, I'm not going to judge people for their interests and tastes. I just don't find a lot of other stuff that existed around the same time as goth and would have been lumped in with it, or, would have been like considered, oh yeah, that's like really typical goth stuff. Don't think a lot of it's great. As always, I think there's some bands that are fantastic in a given genre and a lot of people who I don't really care for. With EBM, I really like Front 242, and like other bands, like I really like, really like Nitzareb. I quite like Tactical Sector, I like Dazzle Faction. I mean, also in a lot of cases, the band that first introduced me to the genre probably wasn't the best representation of it, but I have a positive and emotional, intellectual association with them as being representative of that genre. I like their particular contribution, but maybe they're quite derivative. Maybe they started doing this genre like 4, 5, 6 years later. Maybe they're not really good representation of it, but they're the band that got me into that music, so I'll always like them. And I think that's the thing, like, this idea that this music isn't inherently good, it's like, yeah, it was inherently good because it suited a specific time. You latched onto it at a moment in your life when it was perfect for you, but, different contexts, different times, people mightn't necessarily identify with the same way. And I don't think it's a matter of production. I think it can sometimes just be a matter of aesthetics. The premillennial kind of optimism, this kind of like neoliberal consensus period, I don't think a lot of this like grim stuff was really suitable for then. But now the way the world is going, I think there's a return of this kind of vibe. And obviously whatever the hell it's called, the 30-year cycle is coming around to the 90s now, which I'm incredibly looking forward to. All this old is new again. I really wish people could just do new stuff universally, but obviously you're going to draw on the past. But
I mean, if the 30-year cycle for the 90s involves more people, more music with driving beats and people getting together in big groups and dancing to like heavy techno and stuff, like, I'll take it.
Yeah, that's true. It really does depend what's recycled. Like, whenever people talk about 80s music, they're only talking about a very specific subset of sounds. Did New Romanticism ever really come back?
There's like some new romantic influenced synthwave stuff. Like a lot of, like if you look at any of Perturbator's vocal tracks, they're very like new romantic. No, the aesthetic didn't really, but the sound certainly did here and there.
Okay, fair enough. I just mean that there's always been a diversity of sounds that existed in any given era. And whenever people talk about like the 30-year cycle of like music and fashion, it's often drawing on a very small subset of them. And often in a really odd way. Whatever. Anyway,
don't get me started on the 80s revival. Like the dawn of synthwave, it was never supposed to be about bringing back the 80s. It was supposed to be about retrieving these like moods and techniques, like practical effects in movies and synths and stuff like that, bringing them back and then continuing to use them. But of course the marketing people got a hold of it. But I think I've talked about this in the podcast before, but yeah, that the way that kind of fell to marketing, and also like proto-fascist to full-on fascist, like backward thinking, was just depressing.
Oh, like backwards facing utopianism.
Exactly.
Like, if we go back to this, things will be so much better.
If I was in the 80s right now, I'd be driving a Cadillac with a hot girl and she would never criticize me and everything would be sunny and we'd go to the arcade and stuff like that.
Yeah. Arcades weren't even that good.
Arcades are fun.
I don't know, when you're a broke kid, they're just kind of a place where you waste a lot of money beating the shit out of people on Tekken 3. Yes, that is a very specific example. No, I will not be elaborating.
Do you remember the House of the Dead 3 machine they had in one of the cinemas in I think
that was the one with the pump action shotguns?
Yeah, and
right?
the shotguns were fucking broken, so to play it you had to like cut yourself on the
I think I got to it before they broke. Maybe I did break them. Apologies. I always love the House of the Dead games. They're kind of a pain in the ass to emulate. I think I actually still have the House of the Dead 1 or 2 disc around here somewhere, but obviously it doesn't work on Windows. What are we on? 10? Yeah, Windows 10. So it's been a bit of a few jumps through hoops to get it working, but it's fun. Kind of kills my fingers though, but whatever.
I was a typing of the Dead kid. Yeah, it's such a good game. So we're kind of coming up on time now, but I have one more kind of thing I'd like to ask you about. So when you were starting off the project, the Molly Noise project, like specifically the Molly Noise project, not in the early days before it kind of developed into a sound and you weren't releasing stuff. What was your shower thoughts vision of the ideal like Molly Noise show, or like the ideal Molly Noise album, like what you wanted it to become, and is that different now, and if so, what is it now? If that's
I wasn't looking at a moving target. I wasn't looking at a fixed target. I was thinking something in motion where I would keep trying to do something different. I might have spoken with criticism about certain genres or whatever, but it's about out of love. I want things to continue to get weirder. And if anything, I've been very rewarded over the last couple of years of musicians just doing the most wonderfully strange combinations of things. So for me, it was like, okay, I want to put out music that doesn't really sound a ton like everyone else, and I've broken that several times. I've done stuff directly inspired by other musicians or within like pretty clearly established styles, but I just wanted to try my hand at continually doing something that would be surprising. And this is about like changing up processes and committing to not reusing the same instruments every album or the same effects, or always making sure I'm using new field recordings or building a drum kit from scratch from my own samples. I wanted, and I've broken this again several times, I wanted something that people could dance to, which is now gone. And not universally. I will be going back to it on certain tracks, but, you know, I've kind of relaxed that. I wanted something that wouldn't just make people feel negative, but would maybe have room for a degree of, you know, negativity, but not like fixated on it. I wanted people to feel like there's something of substance. And I wanted the room to do things that maybe broke a number of genre conventions. This is really airy fairy stuff. I wanted to have a sense of fun and humor with it. I didn't want to just be dead serious. I had tried playing it straight, and I have nothing, not even remotely straight, but I tried playing it straight with a number of bands and projects, and I realized I wasn't enjoying myself. I was conforming to, oh God, that word conforming, oh no. I was adhering to a prescribed, pardon? It just has negative associations in my head. It's something, it does not matter. I was adhering to a lot of boring genre or style or fashion or whatever it was, conventions that had been laid down, 10, 20, 15 years earlier by people I didn't care about. Why was I doing that? It seemed like the thing I should do, so I just gave up on that. And I've returned to a degree of formalism with certain things because, like, you know, not everything needs to be abandoned. 3 minutes is a reasonable amount of time for a song to not overstay your welcome. You can also do 6 or 10, but, you know, depends what you're doing. What was the bloody point? It's hard to reconstruct my thinking at the time. This is probably oversharing, but every single album has been done on a different psychiatric medication. Yeah, so it's, I don't know if it's affected the sound too much, but I know, I mean, Fragility is, I don't care, like, people might read whatever into different albums. Fragility is the darkest album I've ever composed, in terms of where I was at in my headspace. It was not a good time. But music has always been therapeutic. It's allowed me to expel a lot of stuff. I want to say onto the page, but like as if I use paper or no classical notation. But it has been a way of excising certain feelings, not maybe totally, but putting them out there. I have difficulty sometimes expressing certain things to people. To be too honest about the self, to me, is to make yourself kind of vulnerable. I don't think that's an uncommon idea.
No, yeah, a certain level of vulnerability needs to be achieved to be able to, you know, create honest artwork for sure. So
that was the other thing. I wanted to be sincere. I didn't want, I don't mean sincere in this kind of really po-faced way. I just mean that I didn't want anything to be done because I was trying to make myself look cool to someone. I didn't want to imagine an audience or be, you know, looking for I didn't want the word demographic to ever enter my head when I was creating music. I think someone I've been very heavily inspired by, I didn't get to mention a lot of influence, but Android Lust, Shaki has been a massive inspiration because I've never spoken or anything, although she followed my dead name Twitter account years ago, and I never picked her up as a follower again, but that's a whole other thing. I really like her because she never really stopped changing, and she never really wanted to be lumped in with a lot of other artists who were just happy doing the same thing every couple of years. I think it's sad that she hasn't had the same volume of output that I'd love, because I always thought her music was very interesting. But Android Lust, I think everything she's done has been great. I wish there was more. I'm always very interested in hearing what she has to do. Look, I don't think you need to necessarily completely uproot your sound every time you do stuff. I'm a big fan of Mind in the Box. I have literally listened to their entire set of albums in order when working. Not on music, obviously. That would be strange, listening to music while working on music. But like, and that stuff is Stefan Pois, I think, or Pois. German is my pronunciation great. But like that just kind of evolves and improves and refines. The production gets better. Maybe the instruments sound a bit less tinny. I don't know how to describe it. But Android Lust seems to just keep evolving and getting more interesting in everything from sounds to song structures. She doesn't seem to like aggressively break tons of rules or anything, but I don't know. I like seeing where she's going. I like being surprised when I hear a new musician. And there's like so many musicians I could cite, which I'm a huge fan of. But I just mean thinking back, probably the first person who I was like, okay, I want to do something not like her, but inspired by her kind of approach, let's say.
Cool. So has now going forward with the new album that you're working on, which is kind of, from what I've heard so far, kind of an evolution of your sound, is your idea of what the project is changed?
Yeah, so like I've been very not hostile. What is the word I'm looking for here? Insecure, quite genuinely. I've been insecure about putting my voice on tracks. I have done it previously in a very heavily processed form on Impure Noise, for example. It's still processed, still going to be distortion or whatever, but it's probably me singing in what might be more recognizable as a singing style. And so that's affected how songs have been written. They're less loopable electronic, I suppose, and more like straightforward songs with the whole things like, progressions and like identifiable verses and choruses. I know, truly radical. And maybe it's less danceable, but I don't know. We're kind of in a period of time where I'm not sure danceability is something I need to heavily fixate on. There are a few tracks on there which are just very, very, very danceable, but a lot of them aren't, and that's fine. The approach has been to kind of, I don't know, I've just been kind of listening to a lot of music, and I mean a lot of different types of music. I don't, was this there's a lot of different types of music, they just mean like 3 genres of metal. I kind of find that risible. I mean, I've been listening to hyperpop, and I've been listening to noise rock, and I've been listening to, I've been going back and listening to some like Prokofiev and stuff, like everything. I mean, I've listened to a lot of hip hop recently as well, which is great. More on the noisy and weird side.
Yeah, hip hop's gotten really fucking good over the last few years. I was never a huge, really able to get into it because it was so macho. But with all the like queer and women hip hop artists coming out, it's been great.
I think maybe, I don't want to challenge you or contradict you. I don't think hip hop has always been macho. I just think a lot of the stuff always put forward has been very macho. This is an entirely massive tangent we can go on. I just think I've just been able to get into it a lot more recently. Friends have been very good at kind of sending me stuff that I've really liked.
I don't necessarily think hip hop itself is macho. It's just the artists that people would tell me to listen to, like Wu-Tang or whatever.
Sorry,
I'd just be like, ugh, I don't like this.
Yeah, absolutely. What was I going to say? My God, was there even a thought in there?
Your current influences, what you have been listening to at the moment while working on this new album.
Oh, just so many genres of stuff. I mean, like, I could start listing bands while I'll be here a while, and I don't even know if I'm necessarily drawing inspiration from them in terms of sounds, but maybe more just like, yeah, I can do anything with this. I don't have to stick to a certain style or what have you. But yeah, look, it's mostly songs you can scream along with. There's some actual identifiable hooks in there. It's probably more viscerally sincere in terms of the singing style. I've never been disingenuous with the music, but I've been willing to expose myself more on this album. Wait to see the album cover as well. But yeah, it's called Profane Feminine. I don't write a lot of music about being trans. I think most trans musicians get this a lot. There's 1 or 2 like notes on there. Most of it is about relationship stuff and relating to certain things I've been processing through my entire life. But people are going to read it a certain way, and I have kind of, in the same way that people actually call me Molly Noise and stuff, my name is Molly. Molly Noise is a project name. I've just kind of given up caring. It's cool. Molly Noise sounds like a great name anyway. It's my name now, fine, whatever. In the same way as that, I think once you put something out there, people are going to interpret whatever they're going to interpret it. So long as they don't insist on telling me what I think of it, that's fine. The author is dead. Long live the author.
I hate that whole discourse. I wish whenever people start talking about death of the author, it's literally they're just trying to get clicks and retweets and replies and stuff, because like ultimately it doesn't fucking matter. The author's intention matters, but also your own interpretation of it matters as well to you. So like half the things people argue about online are literally just people trying to get attention. It's so irritating. But at the same time, when these things circle around, people who haven't heard about them will hear about them. But at the same time, again, they might end up being more influenced by other people's like shitty opinions on that than being like, oh, this is an interesting concept I have to look into myself.
I think there's an inevitability of not being able to understand what the author's intentions are unless you go read everything they've produced alongside it. Like, I'm trying to think of a good example here. The resonances that exist in Brave New World, for example, hit very different to someone living in 2020 than they did in someone in 1980, and very different to someone in 1960. And that is a consequence of the context in which they're read. And they probably read a lot different in somewhere like Romania than they do, like Romania in, say, under Ceausescu than they do in Ireland under, let me think, Albert Reynolds or someone. I'm trying to think of a good example here where aspects of the eugenicist policy and the social stratification that exist in that novel can be identified with different currents and tendencies that exist in that person's world. I think that is an inevitable consequence of a person's interaction with the text. I don't think there is an authoritative reading that matters in the same way as what is gained. I think meaning is generated by the interaction of the individual and the text. And the idea that there's someone who can give you a prescribed meaning that matters more than what you gained from it seems quite strange. We're not talking about food and sustenance here. There isn't a fixed number of calories in a book. There is what is gained from it. Now, look, I understand if we're talking about like a scientific text, then generally speaking, yes, centimeters have very fixed meanings, and we can all agree on that. But we're talking about literature or poetry or music. It is inevitable. People are going to pick it up and run with it in a different way. I mean, like, again, like the first album I listened to by Laibach was Opus Dei. I did not realize it was an album of covers. I just thought they were really cool tracks. It was only when I recognized the Queen cover, I realized the joke that was being played on me, and it was fantastic. But it was my introduction to a series of sonic soundscapes that never really thought could be considered musical. A lot of it's very churning and mechanical. I loved it. Never heard anything like that before. It was being produced by a bunch of weird art assholes who I still love from Slovenia. Like, you know, I'm not sure we necessarily share a cultural context. And this was long before I would have even had internet access to go read anything about them. So was I to create a meaning in my head and then allow it to be overwritten by them later? Or was I to totally reserve judgment on something I was engaging with and then go read what they actually meant by it? I don't think that makes any sense.
I mean, again, it's highly contextual. It really is, because like there could be a way where, I don't know, I can't think of any examples, but you couldn't there, especially with fucking adult Disney fans, right, who are going around interpreting transgressive art as the most heinous, malicious versions of themselves, and then sending people the authors death threats and stuff like that, when if you actually look at the author's life and the context from when they were in, you realize that what is being said is something very different. I think there are contexts where like maybe the author's intention overriding your reaction is possibly a good thing, but again, it's all contextual. I'm not saying that gotcha, the fucking author's intention is better than that thing. You know, it's just all these things are so fucking contextual that a lot of the simplified discourse around it is just makes me want to put my head through a wall.
I tend not to engage with people on the internet, specifically around media, because, well, specifically Twitter, it is a machine designed to generate attention via a very conflict-based interaction. The way people learn to use Twitter is it's a constant game of what I think historically has been called one-upmanship, and I can't even think of the more correct term these days, and I don't really give a shit. It's pointless, and I'm not interested in engaging with it. And the idea that someone's getting death threats over art they've created. What I will say is I think it is deeply saddening to see. Have you heard the expression two bald men fighting over a comb? It's kind of weird to see adults having these pointless arguments that sometimes boil down to two people arguing the morality of something as meaningless as whether, I don't know, Superman could beat the Flash in a race, or which member of Gem and the Holograms has better makeup. I don't care. This is irrelevant. How does this change your life? And developing significant animosities to each other and attempting to find something out of context a line somewhere, a quote, something they wrote when they were 13. I'm not defending people who write heinous stuff. That's not the intention here. But trying to find something to trip the other person up with and say, oh, this person is a closet Nazi. And I'm like, you do realize there are actual Nazis on Twitter and social media. And you're not really going after them, are you? The idea that you would attempt to use allegations of some sort of serious nastiness against someone when it's on plain display elsewhere is meaningless. And ultimately, you don't need to engage with these people. I block quite liberally and I don't care. I simply do not engage. I do not look at this stuff. I have often said to friends, look, I don't go on Stormfront every day to see anti-Semitic, racist, homophobic and transphobic content. Why would I? Nor do I go on Prosecco Stormfront. Mumsnet? Why would I visit there? I don't care. I don't read the Daily Mail. This is of no mind to me. What matters to me are the people who are in power, who can actually change my life, and what I need to do to oppose them when they're introducing policies that will reshape that. And look, I know there's a degree of like culture makers and stuff inculcating people with bad ideas. Obviously, that does exist, but these things matter less than these people. These things are disproportionately fixated on by people who should really know better. But this is an entirely separate tangent to music and probably the most contentious section of this entire recording. I'm not sure if it should be it should be included, but we'll see, eh?
Oh, it will. This is a good way to leave it off. So in conclusion,
I've marked myself for death.
So in conclusion, touch grass, you nerds.
I think know who your enemies are, and I mean your actual enemies, and deal with them first.
Yeah,
that's yeah. But yeah, generally touch grass, go smoke. Stare at the sky, pet a cat.
Smoke a little bit of weed. Don't smoke weed all the time. You'll fuck yourself up.
I actually don't like weed. I've never liked it.
I find actually that weed is a good grounding thing. When I start getting in too much in my head about the internet, just smoke a little bit of weed and I just go outside and just like, oh right, there's people around me. I have friends and family and a community, and there's trees outside and soil I can plant things in, and the internet is just words on a fucking screen. But
at the risk of posting cringe, I go outside, I stand on the balcony and I listen to the wind moving through the nearby trees, and it's incredibly soothing. And I say at the risk of posting cringe is a nonsense idea. It's effectively a reformulated concept of pretentiousness. Shame and guilt are things that are inculcated in you by other people. You can dismiss them. It's hard to. It's almost impossible to live a life without shame or guilt. But for things that you do are harmless, don't care what other people think. There's no requirement upon you to do so. Easier to say than do, obviously.
Especially if you have like mental illnesses and stuff like that, and like there's
very true. Or especially if your income is dependent on being a visible public figure on the internet, maybe who doesn't have access to PR and representation and all that. And let's leave that there anyway. But I like to go out and listen to the wind and just kind of chill, sit in the balcony, let my cat come out, headbutt me, stretch, etc. She's a very good girl. Very old as well. I think she's 16 at this point. I remember training her when she was a kitten. At this point, I just give her treats whenever, because she's old. She's going to die. May as well make her last couple of years happy. Oh my God, she snores so loudly. Okay, we're officially into the absolute weeds of nonsense here. We should probably terminate this.
Sure. Well, yeah, this is a fun conversation.
Good. Okay, so I'm Molly Noise. I'm at Impure Noise on Twitter. There's a link there to my link tree. You can find me on Spotify and Bandcamp and all the other places. Buy my music. Yeah, I do commission-based music for basically anything you want it for. I'm willing to negotiate. I'm very nice. Yeah, that's about that then.